Isabella I of Castile, the princess who came to the throne against all odds. You probably know Isabella I of Castile by the title given to her by Pope Alexander VI, Isabella the Catholic. Although we'll talk about that in this video, there are some very interesting facts about this iconic queen. How could a princess, relegated from the throne, become the most successful queen in the history of the Kingdom of Castile? Join us to find out. Early years. Isabella was born on April 22nd, 1451. She was the infant daughter of King John II of Castile and his second wife, Isabella of Portugal. As an infant, Isabella had no political plans of any kind, as the throne was a distant thing for her. In fact, when Isabella was 2 years old, her mother gave birth again, which relegated Isabella to third place in the line of succession, as she now had 2 male siblings ahead of her. King John II died on July 22nd, 1454, when Isabella was only 3 years old. As expected, the throne was inherited by Henry, Elizabeth's older brother. The late king made his plans for the line of succession very clear, putting the 2 boys ahead of Isabella, as well as dividing an abysmally unequal inheritance among his children. After the death of her father, Isabella moved with her mother and her brother Alfonsi to Arevalo, land that the late King John II had left to his wife. In this lonely and excluded place, Isabella met some people who gave her the support she needed, since her mother suffered from mental problems. Her late father never gave her any affection, and her older brother only cared about her to keep her away from the right to the throne. Chain of events that kept her away from power. Henry IV, Isabella's older brother, did not comply with his father's will, as he gave lands and noble titles that belonged to Isabella and Alfonsi. This damaged more and more the image of the king, which was already almost destroyed before his arrival to the throne. Henry IV was a weak man, politically speaking, and he was not wise when choosing his trustworthy men, since they were the ones who defamed his name and took noble titles. The men of his court seemed to be bent on overthrowing him and doing him mental harm, as they tormented him in the media. Before ascending to the throne, Henry celebrated his first marriage with Blanca de Navarrete in 1440, when they were both 15 years old. The whole city talked about this fact, since with the passing of the years, the marriage had no descendants. So much so that the young prince began to be called impotent and sterile, while the greatest detractors slandered the young man with all kinds of offences, among them calling him effeminate, which was a great insult at that time. After 13 years of marriage, and being already King of Castile, Henry IV requested the annulment of his marriage with Bianca II of Navarrete, alleging that he was under an evil spell that did not allow him to be intimate with his wife. To approve the request, Henry IV presented 2 prostitutes who claimed to have had sexual relations with the king, so that his impotence only affected him at the moment of intimacy with his wife. The marriage was annulled, and Henry married almost immediately with Joan of Portugal, but it took almost 10 years to give offspring, and this resulted in a great conflict. Revolt of the nobles. Henry IV could not give offspring in more than 20 years, so he had already been contemptuously baptised as Henry the Impotent. When Joan, his wife, announced that they were expecting a son, the mockery of the king did not stop. The discredit was constant, since he had suddenly been able to solve his impotence problem, which cast doubt on the veracity of this fact. No one believed that the child was legitimate, but that the king had allowed his wife to be with another man in order to save an heiress. This political instability was the perfect scenario for a group of nobles to organise a coup against the king, whom the people saw more as a buffoon than a monarch. The nobles presented a manifesto against the king, in which they accused him of belittling the Catholic clergy, protecting the infidels and harming his brother Alfonso, openly accusing him of having an illegitimate daughter. Although this almost unleashed a civil war, Henry IV preferred to negotiate peace with his adversaries by means of money. The nobility was extremely dissatisfied with Henry IV, so on June 5th, 1465, the famous farce of Avila took place. A court held a public trial outside the city and used a dummy to represent the king, accusing him of showing sympathy for Muslims, being homosexual, cowardly, and not being Juana's real father. Symbolically, they stripped the dummy of its royal rights and proclaimed Alfonsi, who was only 11 years old, king. This unleashed a civil war between the supporters of each king, but it would be Pope Paul II who would put an end to the succession conflict, declaring Henry IV as the legitimate king. This fact was cleverly exploited by Isabella. Isabella's deception to reach the throne. Alfonsi died in dubious circumstances in 1468, which left Isabella closer in line of succession. Henry realised this and desperately tried to arrange a marriage for his sister. She took matters into her own hands and refused these marriages upon very clever pretexts, since the men Henry intended to marry his sister were older than 40 years, so Elizabeth could appeal such arrangements, claiming that the age difference would bring problems in the couple. Henry finally found a perfect candidate, since Elizabeth could not find arguments to undo this agreement. As the nobleman was on his way to the city to betroth Isabella, he died suddenly within minutes of arriving at his destination. Before her brother could find another suitor, Isabella arranged a clandestine wedding with Ferdinand II of Aragon, but a new conflict presented itself to the unlucky princess. He and she were second cousins, as their grandparents were brothers. In order to carry out their marriage, they had to obtain a papal bull that would allow them to marry and annul the consanguinity. Upon receiving a negative response from the Pope, who feared reprisals, Isabella managed to obtain a forged bull. The document supposedly allowed Ferdinand to marry any princess with whom he had a family tie, up to the 3rd degree. In order not to arouse suspicion and to prevent their marriage from being interrupted, Ferdinand and Isabella were extremely cautious. Isabella I managed to circumvent her custodians with the excuse of going to visit the tomb of her brother Alfonso, while Ferdinand crossed the entire city in disguise. Both celebrated their marriage on October 19, 1469. Rise to power. As Henry IV was accused of not being the legitimate father of Juana, his daughter, she was completely out of line of succession, so that Isabella had finally won the arm wrestle against the odds and could ascend to the throne. This event took place on December 13th, 1474, after the death of Henry IV. Isabella was proclaimed queen, and the War of Castilian Succession was unleashed the following year, a conflict that confronted Isabella supporters and Juana's supporters. This war lasted almost 4 years and came to an end with the Treaty of Alcazobas, which recognised Isabella and Ferdinand as kings of Castile. Reign. Isabella brought Castile to its peak, gaining the support of the people and taking power away from the nobility. She reorganised the system of government and administration, bringing about an economic restructuring that managed to reduce the losses and pay off the debts that the kingdom had inherited from the rule of Henry IV. In addition, she is remembered for supporting Christopher Columbus in his search for the West Indies, which led to the conquest of America, and therefore the creation of the Spanish Empire. Death. Adversities accompanied Isabella for the rest of her life, as her last years were full of misfortunes and calamities that made her fall into a deep depression. It was probably this depression that ended the life of the Queen, who suffered from dropsy. On November 26, 1504, Elizabeth said goodbye to the world. For years, the figure of Isabella was overshadowed by the enormous number of important events that occurred at the same time, or by the eclipsing figure of her husband, Ferdinand II of Aragon. But as we've seen, Isabella I was a brilliant political strategist. Before you go, we remind you that if you liked the video, it would help us a lot if you subscribe to the channel, to continue growing little by little and bring much more content. Now, without further ado, we say goodbye.